There we go. You can't really be a philosopher if you aren't jacked. That is to say, you can be one, of course, no one can stop you, but perhaps you shouldn't be. And you can certainly not be a very good philosopher if you aren't in good shape. Today's video is going to be a fusion of the different topics I talk about on this channel. So fitness in the sense of, training, physical capability, general health, and philosophy. And it is more or less the reason why I talk about all three of these topics on the channel as well. So the idea that you can't be a philosopher if you aren't in good shape is basically the baseline for this entire channel's existence. The reason I make these types of videos and the reason I have combined these topics together. Now, what do I mean when I say this? Because, of course, there have been a lot of philosophers who were not in great shape, and very few philosophers who have been in incredible shape. And if you ask me, this is actually the problem with a lot of moral questions and a lot of the issues we have on an intellectual level in the modern world. As I talked about in the video, at least to an extent, that I recorded yesterday after my workout, being in shape changes your perception of reality. So beyond the fact that you can do more stuff than other people, just based on the fact that you're stronger, you have better stamina, you're more agile, you're athletic or more athletic in some capacity or another, right? Beyond this fact, there's also a psychological, a mental component to the whole idea of being in shape and being physically capable of doing stuff. It's not just a practical function, it changes your entire reality. And what it also changes along with this, and this is something that Nietzsche talked about a lot, is your morality and your attitude towards life and the world. Strong people, good-looking people, intelligent people, and by intelligent, I mean people who are actually intelligent, like they have a high IQ. I'm not talking about people who sort of LARP as an intelligent person, but they're actually just midwits who have acquired a lot of knowledge. People who have these heightened capacities to enact their will on the world. And some of these things are born and some of these things are bred. So to a pretty significant extent, you can influence this yourself if you have the willingness to do so. But people like this tend to espouse a very positive, active sort of morality, what Nietzsche called master morality. See, people can never truly escape subjectivity. Even with philosophy, even with as abstract a thought as you can possibly imagine, you can go further and further and further down your abstract rabbit hole. But even the question of which rabbit hole you've chosen to go down is already connected to who you are. And in fact, the willingness to become more and more abstract is also connected to who you are and to the capabilities you have for engaging with the world. A lot of the very abstract thoughts that have come out of philosophers' minds, and I'm talking about the kind of stuff Kant talked about, for instance, which, a lot of his philosophy is very sort of hardcore, very ideas taken to the extreme. A lot of this stuff could only really spring from the mind of someone who is not sort of connected to the real world in a balanced way. And I'm not going to dive too deeply into specifics here because I would always recommend that you read someone's philosophy yourself. I don't want to misrepresent anything here. I think people have maybe a vague idea of the kind of stuff Kant talked about, but essentially taking ideas like not lying, that type of thing, to the absolute extreme and saying there's no circumstance under which you should do this thing or that thing, that sort of very absurd kind of philosophical thought. You can essentially summarize these kind of ideas, this kind of thought, as that which sort of leaves the realm of common sense. And by common sense, I mean things that are perhaps complex thoughts, things that are perhaps more abstract concepts. But when you explain them to a random person, a normal person with a healthy attitude towards life. And by normal, I don't mean necessarily the average person in modern Western society. I mean someone who is in good shape, who is mentally and physically healthy, etc. If you explain a concept to them, even if it is a little bit more abstract or a little bit more complex, but they hear your explanation and not trying to please you, not trying to seem smart, just actually trying to engage with what you're saying, they feel like it just makes sense. They feel like it just intuitively seems quite sensible. That is what I would call common sense. A lot of the stuff Nietzsche, for instance, writes about is written in a way that is pretty hard to understand, and it's quite convoluted in some places. Like some of his sentences you have to read 3 or 4 times to even kind of grasp what the fuck he is saying. But the overarching concepts, the overarching themes, the general stuff he talks about is pretty intuitive. And I've explained some of his philosophical concepts or some ideas related to them to people who were not well versed in philosophy and who were not sort of highly intellectual in a similar capacity either. And they didn't have a hard time understanding this stuff because it kind of sort of just intuitively made sense. And I think this ultimately has a lot to do with the fact that at the end of the day, we are animals. And we are very interesting animals. We are very advanced animals as far as our intellect goes, but we are still animals. And an animal that is not in good shape, that is not in good health, is an animal that will develop psychological issues as well. Just as an animal with psychological issues may very well also develop physical issues. So if someone is not in shape, if someone doesn't regularly train, if someone eats an incredibly shit diet, they should not be looked to for philosophical advice, for philosophical ideas about humanity, society, the nature of man, a good life. Because this is an individual who is speaking from a position in life, from a reality that is actually not a good one. Recently I saw a video that was recommended to me by, I don't even remember what the guy's name was, but it said something about, masculinity in the modern world, some such, there's a lot of videos like that nowadays. And the guy who made the video was like a skinny dude. And I just saw that video and without clicking on it, thought to myself, just looking at this dude, is he the one to tell me about masculinity? That sounds arrogant to some people. But I think this is an important question to ask yourself. Regarding just about anything, really. I've talked about this in a previous video in a more specific context. that you should think about who you're taking fitness advice from if you're listening to someone who's not even in great shape. Right? You're taking fitness advice from some skinny dude or someone who's even kind of chubby. Does that make sense? If that person had the secrets to being in great shape, why aren't they? And now you might say, well, maybe they choose to not be in great shape. Why would they choose that? Any person who has the choice between being in great shape and not being in great shape will choose the former unless the latter seems so fucking hard, virtually impossible to them, that it's not worth the trade-off. And if that's the case, do they really have good advice to give? Compared to someone who is in great shape, so who has obviously made that choice and seems to be able to maintain that in their life. No, of course you should take advice from someone who's in great shape. And there are some caveats to this, steroids, that type of thing. But if we exclude that, if we're talking generally about people who just naturally train, of course you take advice from the guy who actually looks like he should be giving advice on what we're talking about. And that is not to say that a strong mind can't grow in a sick body every now and then, or that even a good thought, just one good thought, can't grow from a weak mind inside a weak body. Nietzsche was a pretty sickly dude, but he had this sort of will to continue seeking strength. Like, the dude was not in great health, but he went fucking hiking every day during significant periods of him writing the notes for many of his works. But even despite this fact, a lot of his writings are a little bit convoluted, a little bit neurotic. And I think that's also a symptom of his time. If you look at other writings from around this time period, it was kind of sort of just the style of the time, but still, I think some of his concepts, many of his concepts are great, but the guy probably wouldn't have written these strange, convoluted, very hard to grasp sentences. He probably would have been a lot more straightforward, just confidently, very clearly conveying what he wants to talk about to people if he had been in better health. And you might say that's just my opinion, but I think Nietzsche would have actually agreed with me on that. Getting back to the topic, though, it's not like, again, there can't be any good thoughts, any good concepts springing from the mind of someone who is not healthy, who's not in good shape, etc. I'm not saying it's impossible. What I am saying is that it is improbable. The general mindset, the general outlook on life, the general sort of identity of someone who is not fit, who is not healthy, can only be that of a person who is not healthy and who is not fit. Otherwise, why is this person like this? And now there are people, of course, who have problems when it comes to their health or fitness that are not of their own making. But still, with these people, you can look at the stance they take towards life. You can look at what they make out of their situation. There are people who live their life in a wheelchair, but their upper body is jacked as fuck. Now that's a person I might want to listen to when it comes to certain types of fitness advice. But then also, without being offensive towards this person, I'm not going to take advice on sprinting from this guy. How to improve my medium distance running speed. Because the guy is in a wheelchair. Getting back to the point, the chances are someone who is not in the kind of shape you would want to be in, who is not healthy, who is not fit, who is also maybe not living a good life in other ways, looking at other metrics of life, who's also maybe not particularly successful at anything they like doing or at making money, depending on what you want to look at, right? They don't have a successful career. They don't have anything they're enthusiastic about that they're successful at or that they invest a lot of time into, that they're passionate about, except spouting weird, abstract, neurotic shit. They don't have a good relationship with their family or with friends. They don't help their community. None of these things that you might want in your own life. Now, if you don't give a shit about this kind of stuff, I guess maybe take advice from this guy. But then again, he's probably still not in good shape, etc. But whatever it is you want to take advice on, you should look at the dude behind it. And the fact of the matter is that the people who tend to most strongly feel drawn to a primarily philosophical life, a life that is very much focused on philosophy to a very significant extent. And by very significant, I don't mean, thinking about this kind of stuff every day. I mean, you're essentially doing very little other stuff. The types of people who are most drawn to this kind of life are generally people who don't have a lot going on in their life. So a lot of hardcore philosophers, certainly of the last couple of centuries, were folks who didn't have the kind of life that, to me, would suggest that you should listen to their ramblings. And I think this is also something important to keep in mind for any of you guys who are more interested in philosophy. Now, I know I make mostly training content on this channel, but I'm sure there are some, if not many, subscribers who are interested in more of the philosophical content. And if that's something you're interested in, if that's something you're enthusiastic about, I would very much encourage you to still watch my fitness content and get in shape. And you can go ahead and watch other fitness content if you're interested in getting in a different kind of shape, or if you're interested in specific sports that I don't talk about. But the idea is the same. If you're interested in philosophy, if that's the main reason why you're here, you should still train, and you should still get in great shape, and you should still eat healthy and maintain other good habits throughout your day-to-day life. Because it is actively going to impact the actual quality of your philosophy, the actual worth of your philosophy to humanity. And getting back to what I said earlier, I think this is one of the reasons why modern Western society is intellectually a little bit fucked up, and why there's all these bizarre kind of ideologies buzzing around and clashing with each other, is because people have been listening for the last couple of hundred years way too much to weird fucking neurotic motherfuckers. Don't listen to these people. You think because someone is intelligent, they have something sensible to say? Let me tell you, as an intelligent person, fuck no. Hell no. Intelligent people can say some of the dumbest shit ever if the surrounding circumstances, if the general life that this thought that they present to you comes from is shit. If the baseline is shit, if the body is shit, if the body's health and fitness are shit, this person is at best going to use their intelligence to create advanced, sophisticated cope for their shit situation, which is maybe going to be harder to see through for you, but it doesn't change the fact that it's fucking cope. So don't listen to people who sound intelligent just because they sound intelligent or because they've read a billion books. It doesn't matter. If you look at their life and their life is shit by your standards, again, this depends on what you actually want to take advice on from them. But if the underlying circumstances of their life are shit, they probably don't have great advice on life to give. I think, Socrates is one of my favorite examples. Socrates, by all accounts, was kind of an ugly motherfucker. And he also wasn't really, he didn't have like a great social standing. I know he kind of created a following for himself through his philosophy, but I think that's one of the main reasons why he did that shit in the first place. And if you look at these dialogues by Plato, you got a motherfucker who is ugly, who is not doing jack shit with his life, walking around, getting on people's nerves, trying to debate them about bizarre fucking shit, trying to, get under their skin, asking a billion questions. Like, dude, shut the fuck up. Why did And the sort of basic midwit approach to these texts is to say, oh, look how clever this guy is. Oh, he's asking all these questions. Ha, he's trapping these guys in their, limited understanding of what they do. There is no ultimate understanding when it comes to the things humans do. Why? Because we're just animals at the end of the day. A lot of what we do is based on our nature, not on some kind of rationale. So no, Socrates is not some intellectual giga chad. Socrates was just an annoying motherfucker who found a method of getting on people's nerves that apparently had not been tested before to this extent, and so folks just didn't know how to deal with it. That doesn't change the fact that, as an individual, he was not the kind of person you really should look up to or take advice from when it comes to general philosophical questions. By the way, to all my philosophy bros, if you're interested in getting in shape, I'm going to drop this in here real quick. Go ahead and check out the Primal Physique course down below. It's a pretty comprehensive course on getting in great shape, just all around, healthy, physically capable, not a specialized type of physique, but a body that is just all around physically powerful. And in the course, I talk about how to make training a regular habit, how to eat, how to consistently progress on training and diet, etc. So it's a very comprehensive course for people who, are maybe a little bit standoffish about training. You're going to get everything you need in terms of knowledge. There's also some training programs included, etc., to just hop onto the habit of training and get into great shape so your philosophy is actually worth a damn. And I would very much encourage people who get into working out in the spirit of this video to kind of keep an eye out for the way in which they might change as a person. So if you start training, if you maybe buy the course, you hop on a training program, as your body improves, as you become stronger, more powerful, healthier as well, try to maybe consciously perceive how you are starting to change as a person on a psychological level, on a personality level as well. Because I think you might be surprised how much of a difference just being a little bit stronger makes in your whole identity as a human being. Also, for those of you who are interested in a more personalized approach, so maybe you want to talk to me in person, get some personal coaching, or maybe you're already training and you want to take your training to the next level, you can go ahead and hit me up either on Coffee, which is down below again, or you can hit me up on Instagram in the DMs and we can talk details. I can make a personalized training program for you. We can also have personal coaching calls. So yeah, if that's something you're interested in, you can also go ahead and hit me up. All that being said, I think I've spoken about the main points I wanted to talk about here. I don't know if I got everything out there that I had in mind when I started recording this, but I think overall you kind of got the gist of things. If you're going to take advice from someone, it should be someone who actually seems like they should be giving advice on this topic. And if we're talking about philosophy, which deals with very fundamental questions of human reality, human perception, human life, what it means to be human, what it means to live a good life, questions of society, politics, etc. The types of people who should talk about this shit are not people who are not living a good life. So be very critical when you read philosophy by these types of people. And in general, be very critical or even somewhat dismissive of the advice given to you by people on topics that they are just not qualified to give advice on, based on who the fuck they are. If you're running a business and your friends feel the need to throw in advice, give you unsolicited advice on stuff, and not only do they not have a similar business to you or the same kind of business, they don't even have a business at all. Like maybe randomly there's going to be a good piece of advice in there, but how much value should you put on that advice given by these friends based on who they are, based on their position, based on what they do? Not a lot. And again, the same thing goes for philosophy, the same thing goes for fitness, specific things as well, specific skills, specific concepts, etc. And I think when it comes to like vocational stuff, this kind of concept is pretty established and pretty obvious. Like you take advice from someone who has work experience in this field or who is very, very well educated on it. That just seems kind of obvious. But for some reason, when it comes to more general questions of life and spirituality, etc., this is not a given. And people take life advice from weird, skinny, fat fucking philosophy bros who sit inside all day and do nothing except read and, have terrible health and terrible eyesight. All right, I'm going to leave it at that. I still got 1 or 2 more videos to record and my voice is already kind of giving out. So if you guys enjoyed yourselves, if you found this interesting, if you learned something, most importantly, or felt inspired to take less advice from people who are not in great shape, go ahead and leave a like. Also, feel free to share this video with friends, family, anyone you might think could benefit from this video. Man, these sentences are getting pretty wild. Go ahead and leave a comment down below if you have something to say, or if you just want to push the algorithm for me, and go ahead and subscribe if you want to see more videos of mine in the future. Again, this video was a little bit of a fusion of the different topics I talk about. In general, I make content on training, on different sports type stuff, but I also make videos on general health and philosophical topics. So if you're interested in this type of stuff, this kind of holistic approach to fitness that I follow on this channel, go ahead and subscribe and activate the notification bell if you want notifications. That's it for now. I'll see you guys in the next one. And until then, have a good one.